Hi everyone, we're back. So we're going to pick up where we left off with the institutional imbalance. I've been away, had some lunch, got rid of this light bulb, which was certainly irritating me up there. Maybe you could live with it. Anyway, who cares? Anyway, we're back. So hello everyone. Hello to Jason Isaacs, of course. And let's push on with our work on the institutional imbalance. So we just spent about 10 minutes or so on the compliant majority. As ever, I always suggest that you should define your terms. And so we're going to define our terms along these particular lines. That what we're seeing here with the institutional imbalance is an inversion of what might reasonably be expected of the relationship between Parliament and government. The idea that with our parliamentary government, we generally assume, quite rightly, that government derives its authority from Parliament by operating through, chosen from, and all of that sort of stuff, which might reasonably lead one to suggest that Parliament is in charge. However, when we look into it, we see that that could not be further from the truth. And I'm going to go into all of these in more detail and the extent to which they either have or have not been reined in. Now then, in terms of government control of parliamentary timetable, you can read that by yourself. Basically, parliamentary agenda is determined by the usual channels, and your reference to that is going to be Super Saturday, and I will link off to that in the footnotes. I'll also link off to the European arrest warrant, which was a little earlier. For those of you coming in here, Super Saturday was Saturday just past. I'm coming at you on the Monday after Super Saturday, where the government summoned Parliament to sit all day on Saturday, presumably therefore missing the rugby, which, based upon the output, watching the rugby would probably have been a much more productive use of their time, because they seem to have achieved very, very little other than talking themselves around in circles. So having been summoned by the government to debate its next move on Brexit, they failed to come to a division. And so basically everybody wasted their time entirely. With the European arrest warrant, we see government slightly being caught on the hop, in that the opposition managed to turn a fairly procedural motion into an issue of some significance. But this happens very, very infrequently. And the reason it happens infrequently is because we have these opposition days, we have backbench business days, we have urgent questions. But these all operate within the wider frame of activity, which is determined by this wonderful phrase here, the usual channels. And the usual channels will always be expected to trump opposition days, backbench business, and urgent questions. Again, with a lot of stuff, this is really just about letting off steam. And we're going to come back and look at a lot of work that was done by the Backbench Business Committee. This is part of the package of reforms introduced subsequent to the Wright Commission, which was 2008-2009. And it's not a secret by any measure that these largely failed to deliver on Wright's vision. But the government paid lip service to them. The Backbench Business Committee does have some control of the agenda, but basically we come round to the usual conclusion that here the tail wags the dog. Another area where the tail wags the dog is the Royal Prerogative, and again we should know all about all of these. The key point is that none of these things can be directly challenged by Parliament. Parliament can legislate to reform these particular positions, but there's very, very little that Parliament can do on a piece-by-piece basis in terms of, checking the granting of ordinance, or the appointing of ministers, or the control of Parliament, this bit here, or indeed military action. Now then, all of that said, we have had, calling elections, how could I have forgot about that one? All of that said, we have had changes to these. The Royal Prerogative has been reined in, and it's been reined in by consent for military action. We know all about this because of the 2013 Syria vote. Now, the point here is that this was reeled in by constitutional convention. This was the principle derived by, or rather established by, Brown and Blair, that by having had 3 votes on the Iraq war, that before the government ordered the military into action, there would be a vote in Parliament. Now, key point here is the ordering of the military into action remains the power of the Royal Prerogative. The idea is that the government would not initiate that without having first run it past Parliament. And of course, in 2018, we had the rather farcical Syrian bombing, where Theresa May sought retrospective application. Was that 2018 or was that this year? I'll link off to it. Another thing to link off to. Let me just make some notes here because I'm promising to link off to an awful lot of stuff. And I don't want to forget. So I am going to link off to the EWA, to Super Saturday, to military action. Yes, it's 2018, right, there we go. So I'll do all of that. So I'll link off to all of those. But again, the point is that there's not much that Parliament can actually do on a case-by-case basis to challenge military action, except by voting, and it's voting again because the government lets it vote. Timing of elections, that was obviously has been since controlled by the Fixed Term Parliament Act. But again, that actual act of dissolving Parliament and calling an election, these are governed by the Royal Prerogative. So Parliament just sort of signs off on the exercise of the Royal Prerogative. The Royal Prerogative hasn't actually changed. So we're seeing, again, Parliament's hand to a certain extent being strengthened, but only because the government has allowed it so to happen. Perhaps much more important is this one, and this is, of course, Baroness Hale's momentous decision in Miller and Cherry versus the government. So here we see judicial review being used to rein in the Royal Prerogative. But again, none of this really is Parliament's doing. The Fixed Term Parliament Act, that was passed by that was the initiative of the coalition government. Now, this is not Parliament taking control and standing up to the Royal Prerogative. Here we see the courts coming in to stand up for for Parliament to do its job. And here we're seeing government again saying, well, actually, no, it looks like we've created a significant precedent here, and so going on in the future, we recognise that Parliament should be allowed to vote before government presses the button. And again, it's the government that presses the button, government that sends the military into action. So the Royal Prerogative does create that institutional imbalance in that each of these is hard for Parliament to police effectively. It can't really challenge the granting of honours easily. It can't challenge easily the appointing of ministers, and so on and so forth. So all of these things are kind of outside of Parliament's direct control. Of course, it could pull down the whole thing on its head through a confidence motion, but that would trigger the compliant majority. Right. Bit of waffle there. Sorry about that. We'll try to remain focused on this one, and this is about perhaps a lot more straightforward. In that, in the institutional imbalance, when it comes to checking the work of government, we're looking at legal sovereignty versus policy sovereignty. The government has policy sovereignty. Parliament has legal sovereignty. Parliament can make, amend, or set aside any legislation it sees fit. It has no right to demand a change in government policy except through law. And with law, again, we're looking at the compliant majority. So we're just coming around in a big circle here. Parliament can advise through select committees, it can challenge through questions, and it can challenge through debates. But what it can't do is demand a change. It has influence perhaps, but not power. It cannot demand that government change its policy. This, of course, is from the first question that we had in the new exam spec. But it's an interesting way of looking at it. And it does give us an interesting insight in that Parliament here might be able to influence decisions, but it can't compel decisions. And there is exceptions to that, and of course we've got confidence motions. We talked earlier about military action, so to a certain extent there is power there, but in each of those circumstances you run headfirst into the compliant majority. Again, where any vote really matters, the government can pull the strings on the compliant majority and get everyone to dance to its particular tune. Select committees have influence, questions and debates. These can all influence here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to link off again in the footnotes to the breaking the cycle and the legislation, which I think I referred to in the other video on legal highs. So breaking the cycle was the select committee report, and then we had legal high legislation, which was the Psychoactive Substances Act of 2016. I'll link off to that in the footnotes, and you'll have some substance there. Again, the difference between influence and power. It can say Parliament has the right to say to government, we really think that you should look into this problem of legal highs, and the government goes, yeah, okay, well, we'll get round to it at some point. And then, what do you know, they got round to it about 3 years later. and we had the Psychoactive Substances Act. I'll check on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Parliament Acts of 1911-1949. This definitely limits the power of Parliament. Certainly, it limits the power of one half of Parliament. And since the Second World War, these are the occasions on which the Parliament Act has been deployed. And again, it just makes it that much harder for Parliament to do its job if half of it is run by the compliant majority and then the other half can just be discounted if they happen to come to a conclusion that the government doesn't like. Usually, the power of the House of Lords to compel government to stop and think and have another go at something can be quite significant. And I give a lot of evidence over here. So here we see specific evidence from certainly my heyday of political activity, that 2006 area where Blair got many a bloody nose from the House of Lords and then belatedly from Parliament. But again, that difference there between power and influence will help you to navigate some of the more nuanced areas of this particular development. So, the compliant majority. Let's just talk about this now. I've got 3 minutes. A working majority of 12 was wiped out in 2017. The Conservatives came back with 317 seats, so they were now in a plurality, but definitely not in a majority. They've not been running a majority since 2017, and now numerous defections mean that the government has effective control of 288 seats, plus 10 DUP. And again, this is what we saw on Super Saturday. The numbers were just not there to get Boris Johnson's legislation through. So the compliant majority, we need to look at it in two things. We look at the majority in Parliament. That doesn't exist anymore. What about the compliance? Well, this is what, even within that 288, we've got no guarantee that legislation is going to hold. I'm going to link off to this. This is from the latest edition of Progress, and it's a way in which the Conservative Party has lost its majority and to a certain extent its compliance since the elections. In terms of the institutional imbalance, I mentioned this one earlier. This is Miller and Cherry versus the government, and what we're saying here is a momentous decision from the from the Supreme Court, telling government that it's one thing to prorogue Parliament in the normal run of things. It's quite another thing to prorogue Parliament for craven political advantage or expedience. And what we see here, again, I mentioned this earlier, is the idea that the courts are stepping in to try to redress the institutional imbalance, to try to help Parliament to do its job. If Parliament has been suspended, then it can't pass laws and it can't hold the government to account. And that was basically, Baroness, the Supreme Court's argument, that what we saw here was the government acting unlawfully in a way that was not consistent with law, specifically common law, we have to assume. And by acting in that way, government was not just slowing things down, it was actually stopping the Constitution from working. And that is not within the gift of government. Government cannot unilaterally suspend the Constitution. And we know this because, of course, Dicey himself said that the general principles of the British Constitution arise not from the declarations of the rulers, in this case Boris Johnson, but instead from the decisions made in individual cases like R. Miller and Cherry versus the government, decisions made in individual cases by an independent judiciary. So here again, Supreme Court making a momentous decision, upholding constitutional principles, upholding parliamentary government, upholding the legal sovereignty of Parliament. And I am pretty much out of town. Out of time. I hope that makes sense. I do appreciate all of the comments that I get from all of you on my videos. Thank you very much for that. Do please send me more comments. Do look at my website. I'll link off to that again. I'm getting my website up and running one more time. And if you have any questions, post them in the comments. I'm open to them. Ideally, as long as they're not accusing me of lying. I try not to lie or being ill-informed. I think that's about it. Thank you very much. Speak to you soon.